My interest in this particular topic came while I was working at the Stewart County Archives processing the election records that we have there. There were gaps in those records. Those records are not really common at a county level, and I wondered whether TSLA might have records that could supplement the gaps that I was finding at the county level. I was astonished, to be honest, of what I found here. I hope you will be too. And then as we go along, I'm hoping that you'll see that what I'm showing you is also a method that you can research another topic that might be of interest to you as well here at TSLA. The rooster, by the way, was adopted as an emblem of the Democrat victories in the 1840s. This image appeared in an 1844 Clarksville newspaper after James K. Polk's victory. So I'm going to talk about several different sources of election records here at TSLA. The first one that I want to go through are the record groups. So let's first make sure everybody knows what the record groups are. They are grouped usually by subject matter and possibly assigned a number by the date that TSLA processed that particular group. Each one gets a number. Many of them, but not all of them, are microfilmed. And most of them have finding aids, and on the microfilm they're on the first reel of that record group. And the finding aids for many of them are also online, which is an awesome thing for us as researchers. I show you a picture here of where in the microfilm room you might find the record groups. In the distance there you can kind of see the entrance to the break room. In the foreground is that little carrel that has the county record guide. So this is the part of the microfilm room that I'm talking about. Where can you find the record groups or listing of them on the TSLA website? Well, here from the main TSLA page, scroll down that categories list on the right until you see state records, and then expand that and click on state agency records. You'll see a list of, currently on the website, 306 record groups. Not all of them are election related, we'll get there in a moment, but these are all of the record groups. And if you just scroll down this list, you're going to have what I like to call attention deficit genealogy disorder. You're going to say, oh, I need to read about that. I'm going to click on that. And notice that these titles are all in blue. That's an indicator that they're hyperlinks. So you can click on any one of those and look at an online finding aid for that record group. The highest number record group right now is 341, so there may be some numbers that are skipped, but at least in this online index of record groups, there are 306. So let's drill down into these and start looking at some of the record groups that relate to elections. Record Group 87 is probably the largest one. Its title is Secretary of State Election Returns 1796 to present. I love that present because that means the record group is alive and well and still growing. I have a picture here for you. There are about 10 drawers of this record group alone, about 700 reels of microfilm just in this one record group. The last reel that I saw in this group was dated 2004. There is a finding aid for this online in that list that I just showed you, so at home you can click on that and kind of get an idea of some of the detail or contents of Record Group 87. But I'll tell you there's a much better finding aid, and I'm showing you another picture here. There's a different carrel back in the microfilm reading room, and this one is over by where the census records are and the birth and death records that we like to use a lot. That cabinet there on the right or on the left. If that helps you for a frame of reference. But there's another carousel of finding aids, and there is a finding aid for this record group 87 in that carousel, and it's actually much better than the one that's online. That's something hopefully we can get the staff here maybe to redigitize the finding aid and put it online. So let's look at what we might see among these 700 reels of microfilm. We'll talk about county censuses. Those aren't election records, but we're going to find them in this record group. There are county election results. There are voter lists. I'll show you just an example here of some of the reels from these 700, and we'll look at some of these in a little more detail. So let's look at that first bullet up there, county censuses. What are we going to see there? There's an 1841 voters list, as it's commonly called. passed by act of the General Assembly in 1840. And there are 70 counties listed in this 1841 voters list. Here's an example from DeKalb County. And if you can see the script there, this is District 1, DeKalb County, 1841, and a list of names. So here are the white free men eligible to vote. This is 1841. And so if you're researching DeKalb County, this is not something you're going to see at the county level. It's here. It's on microfilm. You just have to go downstairs. And just in this 1841 voters list, there are 70 counties listed in just that one state census. Now, not every county has names listed. Some just have totals by district or by county. But you never know. Go look at this and see what you find for your county of interest. Oh, there's from the finding aid, what that tells you, Act of General Assembly. So it's law passed in 1840. It's generally called an 1841 voters list. There's another one for 1851. Here's an example from Benton County, but it's a similar format where you see the lists of eligible voters in that county by Act of General Assembly passed in 1850. This voters list for 1851, or this collection, has 78 counties among it. Still not 100% lists. Some of the counties still just have totals by county, but go look at it and see what you find for your county of interest. There's another one for 1861, showing you here for Stewart County. Unfortunately for us, researching in this time period, for the 1861 state census or voter list, it's only the county totals, so you won't find any counties for which there are individual names listed. But you still might find something of interest for your county just looking in the 1861 listing. And all of this, again, is part of Record Group 87. This one is actually not even mentioned in the finding aids because it does contain just totals by county instead of individual names, but it's there. Many of us are familiar with an 1891 enumeration of male inhabitants. These are in bound volumes, and we've been using them for years downstairs in the reading room. Not all of the copies are great in print, can be hard to read, but the originals are part of Record Group 87. So you can go to the microfilm in the microfilm room, especially if your county is hard to read, and go look at the microfilm of these records. Maybe it's better than the print version. So I've talked about some voter lists that are part of this record group. Let's see what else is in Record Group 87. Oh, there's my finding aid, or my little picture to remind you where for the 1891 census, it's not actually in the Record Group 87 cabinets. It's actually over there with the census records. Is where you'll find that 1891 microfilm. Okay, so also within Record Group 87, what else is in that record group? Oh, I'll just show you there. Oh, this is actually a blow-up of the last drawer of Record Group 87 that just shows you even that the 1841, 51, 61 are well labeled for you. You don't have to go hunting through all 10 drawers of that Record Group 87 to find those lists. And if you've got Sumner County people, you're going to be distracted by the other thing on that label, that there are registered voter lists also in Record Group 87. So let's look at another large part of Record Group 87. This is the bulk of what this collection is, county election results. It contains not just district totals by county, but you'll also see lists of voters like we were just looking at for those special censuses. These were the certified election results that each county had to send in to the Secretary of State, who was in charge of elections, for local, state, and national elections. Every election, county had to certify the election results, send them in to the Secretary of State. And they're all collected here in Record Group 87, starting, as you can see, with 1796. So these collections, these rolls of microfilm in this collection are generally sorted by year and then by county. So if you're focusing on one county, what what for my county is in Record Group 87. You're going to have several reels of microfilm to look through, but they're sorted by date. So you can go through different time periods, look for your county for that. Oh, there's just another snapshot of some of these election returns. 1820s, Carter through Weakley County, 1817, 1816 through 20, Bedford County through White County. You have some of these counties that are burned counties. You think there's no county records? Remember, there are state records. Or these are county records sent into the state, right? So if your county's burned, excuse me, look in these records. Okay. And one more picture of some of the types of county election returns. One of the more interesting periods here for us is the 1861, as Tennessee is entering the Civil War. Those records are here as well. And we'll look at that in a little more detail in a moment. Okay, so here's an example of some of the kinds of county election returns that you'll find here in Record Group 87. This is from November 1796. We were, or those who were in Nashville and not yet tired of having elections all the time, were electing the elector for president and vice president for 1796. So this is a certification that the candidate who was elected, and I love these original signatures. So on this document, you can see the original signatures of the election, the people certifying the election, and their names are here. It's one of the things I really love about these county election records is you're going to see original signatures of the judges and the clerks for those elections. This is one of the earliest records in Record Group 87. Here's another example. This is 1861, June 8th, Sumner County voters. So that election was the election in which Tennessee chose to secede from the Union. And for Sumner County, at least, there's names of individual voters that turned out for that election. Now, we don't know how these people voted. We only know they showed up at the polls. Here's a tally sheet from Sumner County for that election, and so this shows the totals by district in that county. So if you had somebody listed and living in this county, and you knew what part of the county they lived in, you could at least see the sentiment in their county for that vote. The first two columns there are people wanting to secede, and the second two are people not wanting to secede. And if you look, for example, the 7th district down there says Hendersonville. If you had an ancestor who lived in Hendersonville at this time period, you now know that that district went 100% to secede, based on the totals that are here in Record Group 87. Right, so there's the Hendersonville detail. 115 people turned out to vote, and all of them voted for the same outcome. Here's an example from 1872. This is the presidential election, and this is District 1 of Stewart County. We see voters listed. This is after the Civil War, so we're going to see formerly enslaved people in these returns. You may see them listed separately on a colored list. You may see the letter C listed after the names. But at least at this time, until the Jim Crow laws got up and going, you had a lot of formerly enslaved people who were voting. And so you'll see their names in these returns. Okay, now they didn't tell you this in the advertising for this lecture, but I have homework for you. This is just a quiz. What was significant about the election of November 2, 1920? First general election in which women were allowed to vote. Well, those records are here. The anniversary is coming up here in a couple of years. So do what I did. My ancestor lived in Bumpus Mills Precinct, 4th District of Stewart County. Here's a page from that district for that election. And number 227 on that list, Hattie Robertson, was my great-grandmother. So she turned out to vote for that election. And I knew her. I knew her well. I wish I had asked her about that experience. So this is your homework. Go find your ancestors who were alive in 1920, go to the county they were living in, and find them. You'll see, it may vary. You may see their Their name, you may see them listed as Mrs. So-and-so, but go find them. It's a great part of this record group 87. So we've looked at county census records. I've shown you some examples of county election returns. Let's see what else we might find in record group 87. Here are 3 reels of microfilm that grab our attention. The first one, we see Cheatham County Voters Lists, 1865 to 66. Referendum to abolish slavery, 1865. We see a voter registration list for Memphis in the 1870s. We see a voter registration list for Davidson County in 1894. These get kind of random, but go look at the finding aid and go pull those microfilm drawers out and just see what's there for your county of interest. You'll see lots of voter lists, especially for the 1920s and 1940s. And maybe the laws changed, or maybe some counties just didn't understand the instructions. Sometimes they were just told to send in your totals, and some counties just send in the lists of names. And that's what we really want to see as researchers, is I want to see my person of interest name on a voter's list. So come look at these. Okay, so that was record group 87. That's just one of several record groups that have election records on them. So let's go look at a second record group 30, titled Tennessee Secretary of State Records. Now the title has nothing to do with elections, right? These are just records from some Secretary of State. There are only 3 reels in this collection. You see a picture of them there. I found this record group when looking for election-related stuff because the finding aid is on the TSLA website in a searchable format. So when I searched for the word election on TSLA search engine, the finding aid for this record group came up. So it has something to do with elections. The finding aid tells us that most of what this record group is correspondence concerning election of local officials, fees and licenses, or requests about Tennessee. So only a little piece of it is election related, but it's in there. And I found it because of the search engine on the TSLA website. The finding aid does have a list of correspondence to the Secretary of State. So if you're in this record collection, even if you're not looking for election-related stuff, just look through the names and see if your person of interest had some sort of correspondence with the Secretary of State. Here's an example of one of the items relating to elections in record group 30. This is an 1822 letter that somebody wrote to the Secretary of State regarding concern about the election for the Franklin County Sheriff. Here's another example from Rockport on the Tennessee River, that's Benton County, 1865. And somebody's writing a letter to the Secretary of State regarding potential candidates for office. And what this particular writer says is, I regret to state to you that from reliable information, William P. Caldwell is not loyal to the state government. He, having in a speech made at Dresden, denounced the legislature as bogus. Love that. And Mr. Caldwell was a Weakley County man. Here's the part of the finding aid for record group 30, just to kind of give you, and again, these are typically, they're always on the first reel of microfilm. They're almost all online, and we have a paper copy downstairs as well. Number 5 there grabs your attention, even if you're looking for something else. Males loyal to the Union by county, circa 1862. So again, that attention deficit genealogy disorder may kick in, and you may go jump to that. You see notary public listed here. That's actually not election related because notary publics, at least at that time, were appointed, not elected. But if you're researching a particular county, these may be records you didn't know were here on microfilm. So here's some detail from that males loyal to the Union by county. I got distracted as well. And so you see by county, they list names of men who were allegedly loyal to the Union. And now you want to go look at that and see if your people of interest are in that list. Okay, so this was record group 30. I'm going to show you another large record group relating to elections. This is record group 131. It's called military elections, 1796 to 1862. These are elections for people who were officers in the state militia, what we might think of as the National Guard or Home Guard at the time. So those were organized. The militia service was mandatory for people of a certain age in Tennessee before the Civil War. Those people had to gather at appointed times of the year for musters and drills, and they elected officers annually. The election returns for those elections are here in record group 131. So even though this was very much a county thing, you mustered with people from your neighborhood and your county, and you voted on officers within your county, the results of those elections are here because they had to be sent into the state. There are 22 reels in record group 131. And here's an example from a newspaper that tells us that the officers in the Tennessee militia had to meet at certain times. So what we're going to see here in record group 131 are the results of the elections. So these are county records that are not in the county. You can see an example here. Box number 4 are the 1803 election returns by county. So if you're researching a particular county, you can go look at these, and these are organized by date. So again, if you're only looking for one specific county, you're going to have several rolls of microfilm to look through, but you can see how it's organized. You can go look at 1803, then 4, then 5. So let's take a look at a kind of record you're going to find in record group 131. This is an election return for the militia company in Clarksville, November 14th, 1833. This was a list that had to be generated after the election, because the way this worked is you would meet with your local company, elect your officers, send that to the governor, but the governor had to issue the commissions for those elected officers. This is a list of people that they had to write from Clarksville and say, okay, governor, we're asking for a second time. You haven't sent the commissions for the people that won this election. But here are the names of all the people who won officer positions in Montgomery County in November of 1833. So if you have people who would have been of an age to serve in the militia, maybe they were elected as officers, and maybe you'll find record of that in this record group 131. It's a very large collection, covers a lot of years for a lot of counties. These are county records you're not going to find in the county. Another type of document that I love in this record group 131 are the certifications themselves. This is a list of people who are certifying an 1813 election where Robert Walker, who was the local justice of the peace, had appointed these 3 men to conduct an election for the company formerly commanded by Captain N. Ross, and that Nathan Skinner was the winner of that election. But I love these original signatures. These are the signatures of the judges. So these were not people serving in the militia. These were just men of repute in the county certified to be the election judges. And the second one there, William Wallace Sr., is my ancestor. So I love seeing his original signature on this document, even though he was way too old to have served in the militia. So look for these as well in record group 131. Maybe your guy wasn't of an age to serve in the militia, but maybe he was one of the judges and you can see the original signature. Civil War always gets our interest, so in record group 131, military elections for the Civil War era, it's actually quite limited. 1862 records for just 4 counties, but 1861 militia records are available for most counties. So at least for 1861, you can see who the elected officers were for the local militia companies in the various counties. Okay, let's move on to another record group 221, titled Tennessee Elections Division Records. And this one might be a logical place to find lots of good stuff, but it's not all that great. There's only 5 reels, and these are actually the day-to-day records of the elections division itself. So these are the appointments of judges, but not necessarily the actual election returns. The finding aid for this record group, 221, tells us it's mostly commissions for the election commissioners themselves, so people getting appointed to hold an election, and also some certifications for elections in the late 1800s. There is a volume in this record group that will be of interest for Sumner County researchers, an 1866 voter list. It says these voters were apparently loyalists to the Union. So if you're researching Sumner County and you didn't know about this particular set of records, go look in record group 221. So another very specific, I should say, record group 287 involves a specific election dispute in 1990 in Gibson County. There was a machine that had been misread that would have changed the outcome of the election. Ultimately, the folks investigating this election decided to stay with the original results instead of what it should have been had the one machine been taken into consideration. And because of the decision to basically give the office to the person who shouldn't have won, 4 of the 5 county election commissioners were replaced. But if you're researching Gibson County, this one is related to elections. One last record group that I'll tell you about. Record group 289 are commissions for justices of the peace. So these are not the actual election returns. You won't see lists of voter names here. But if you have an ancestor who was elected as justice of the peace, that commission is going to be in this series. These are arranged chronologically from 1856 to 1966. Most of the volumes have an index at the front. So even if the election results in your county don't survive to your knowledge, you might still look here to see at least who won the local justice of the peace elections. Okay, so I've looked at a broad range of record groups. But that's only one type or one source of election-related material here at TSLA. So I want to switch gears here and talk about other sources of election material here at the State Archives. Printed materials, the reading room downstairs, of course, has a great collection of county-level records. I've already mentioned that the 1891 voter list we looked at earlier is down there in the reading room. But you'll also find election-related books such as this one, Record of Commissions of Officers in the Tennessee Militia. I give you the call number there for that. And these are kind of related to that record group 131 we were looking at. These are printed or transcribed lists of people who were elected as officers during an early time period, 1796 through 1815. And I don't believe these election results are part of that record group 131 that I showed you earlier. So if you're researching that time period, come look at this book as well. Some other election, well, there's an example of what detail is in this particular book. By county, lists of names and what office they were elected to and the date of their commission. Also related to the militia law specifically are 3 books that you'll find here at the State Archives listing the rules that governed who had to serve in the militia and how the elections were conducted. For example, in one of these books you'll see that you didn't have to serve in the militia if you were a judge, a court clerk, justice of the peace, sheriff, minister, postmaster, ferry keeper, or if you had a grist mill. You didn't have to serve in the state militia. You can use TSLA's catalog online to find not just militia-related stuff, not just election-related stuff, but if you've got a topic of interest, maybe the word suffrage, just put that in the search engine and see what comes up, because you'll find books, you'll find record groups, manuscripts, and whatnot. Another source of election-related material here at the State Archives are the manuscript collections. There's a great way to search for these as well from the website. That category list that we saw on the right-hand side of the home page, if you'll scroll down to newspapers, manuscripts, and microfilm and expand that section and click on the word manuscripts, then you'll see listed a guide to manuscript materials. You click on that and you can drill down into more than 2,000 manuscript collections that are here at the State Archives. These cover a wide variety of topics just like the record groups, but they're processed as manuscripts. You could certainly drill down on all 2,000 of these and see, oh, that one's of interest, that one's not, oh, that one is, but that might take a little while. So let's see how we can save ourselves some time in exploring what are in these manuscript collections. In my case, from the green search bar at the top of TSLA's homepage, I put the word manuscripts followed by the subject I was interested in, election. And one of the things that led me to was one of the manuscript collections, manuscript number 1181, the David Burford papers. And you see that what I've got circled there, the reason I got a hit on the search engine is I had searched for the word election. And some aspect of this manuscript collection had something to do with election records. So if you had been searching for stock breeding, you would have found this same manuscript collection. So use that search engine to find these manuscript collections that are of interest to you. So I've talked about record groups, mentioned printed materials, I've mentioned manuscript collections. Another source of election-related material here, I'll give you an example, this is the David Burford collection. I'll show you an example there. Smith County election returns. So this is a document that looks kind of like those military elections we were just looking at, but it happens to be over in a manuscript collection. So if you have Smith County interests, maybe you want to go look at that particular manuscript collection. Okay, another source of election-related material here at TSLA is the Tennessee Virtual Archive, TEVA. There'll be a workshop on this on March 23rd, but I'll give you a little sneak peek because I used it as well in preparing this talk today. I searched the word election just to see what's online on the virtual archive relating to elections. Here's an example of an 1837 letter from Lewis Ross to his brother John Ross. John Ross was the chief of the Cherokee Nation at the time. And this particular letter covered a variety of things, but mentioned in here was an election for a tribal election, talking about some treaties that the tribe was in the process of negotiating. And in the letter, he describes where a vote took place, how many people voted, who won the elections. So here's an online document that I was able to find using the search engine and the word election that relates to a Cherokee election. Also online, I love this political poster from 1844. Presidential election is online in the TEVA archive. Up in the front of the race is Henry Clay, who was the Whig candidate. He was shown leading the race, so this must have been a Whig cartoon. In the middle, in the pothole, is James K. Polk, stumbling, and statehood of Texas and expansion of slavery were all embroiled in this particular race. And then incumbent old President Tyler was lagging behind in this political cartoon. 1864 election, Lincoln and Johnson. A presidential ticket is online in the TEVA archive. We think of tickets today as which party you're voting for, but back in this time period, tickets were a physical thing. It was a list of people to remind you to vote for. So you would have a ticket and you could take that to the poll with you to either remind you who to vote for of your party of choice, or if you're like my ancestors and you couldn't read the ticket, you could hand it to the clerk and say, these are the people I want to vote for. Put my name down. So these tickets were distributed like handbills to remind you who the candidates were. This particular original is not here at TSLA. It's over in Morristown, Hamlin County. But it was digitized by the State Archives, and through the TEVA website, you can find documents like this. Here's an election return from Fentress County for 1930. And it's election results for a November election. The kind of thing you might expect to see in one of the record groups here. Signature on it, Sergeant Alvin York, is cool to see. Also in TEVA, election poster for 1930 for that same election. You can see who the candidates were: Cordell Hull, Henry Horton, Senior Bill Brock, and General Hanna. So TEVA is another great source of not just election records, but of digitized documents that might relate to the subject you're interested in. Let's look at some other ways to find online resources using the TSLA website that might relate to elections. There's a search online content search box as well. I put the word election in there, and that led me to a web page called Education Outreach, Civil War and Reconstruction. If you scroll down that page, you'll see election of African Americans to the General Assembly. And if you click on that, you'll come to a website within the TSLA website, this honorable body, and you can find biographies of the African American state legislators in the 1800s. Timelines, you can see there's a whole subset in here just relating to the African American legislators. And I might not have found it if it weren't for that search engine that led me to it, just searching for the word election. Okay, we've talked about record groups, we've talked about manuscripts, we've talked about TEVA. Another source of election-related material here at TSLA is the vast newspaper collection. Now, if you're of a certain age and I mention newspapers and election results, does anything in particular come to mind? What about that from the newspaper? That's an election result. It's an incorrect election result. But newspapers are a great source of election results. Let's take a look. How do we find the newspapers here at TSLA? There are online helps for us. Again, in that category list, if you scroll down to newspapers, manuscripts, and microfilm and click on newspapers, you'll see a list of several things that you can click on. If you click on the first one, 19th Century Newspapers Database, you'll see a list of newspapers from around the country. These are the Tennessee ones, but there are actually more than 200 newspapers in that collection. There's only one problem. If you see down at the bottom it says access to this database is available only through terminals in the Library and Archives building. If you were to click on that external link from home, it would prompt you for a password. And I can't imagine what the password might be, but I don't know, maybe you can just try and guess from home what that password might be. Another great source of newspaper collections is actually a free external website, Chronicling America. TSLA has a list on its website of the newspapers that are in this collection from Tennessee, but that list is actually outdated. Yeah, there's the list that TSLA's website says is in this external collection, but in fact, it has expanded greatly since that particular website was updated. There's also, and this is a true treasure here at TSLA, an untold amount of microfilm, of newspapers on microfilm. TSLA has the largest collection of newspapers on microfilm. And there are some great finding aids for that. If you were to drill down, for example, on Ashland City, you'd see a list of the papers that were there at the time. And if you've used this part of the website before, it used to have lists of actual content for each individual newspaper, which issues do they have on microfilm here. But they've changed that, and now there's a blue hyperlink that says check online catalog. So they actually integrated that into their online search engine. But that'll give you an idea for any given city at a given time period which issues are on microfilm here. That's kind of what the search engine result looks like now, and that's a bit of a decode, but it's there. So an example, here's an election return. Clarksville, Tennessee Watchman, May 1823, telling us that James Hogan was elected Stewart County Sheriff in place of Joseph Smith, who had resigned. 1869 Clarksville Chronicle. Here's an election notice, just telling everybody there's going to be an election, where the precincts are, when the polls will be open and closed. If you're browsing newspapers, it's helpful to know when the elections occurred, and it's similar to today. March was generally the county elections, August, Governor, Congress, General Assembly, November, President. So if you're just browsing a certain location at a certain time period for election-related stuff, just look in the papers mainly in those 3 months for election returns. First Tuesday is generally a good place to start. You notice that in my list of calendar dates there, I don't show senators because we didn't actually elect senators ourselves until 1913. Up until that time period, General Assembly appointed senators. So I've only briefly touched on newspapers. There's a lot more to hear about, and you will hear about them here in this room on Saturday, January 26th. Tania Kuntz will be giving a workshop series full length on using historical newspapers for your research. So watch for the sign up for that. Okay, one last source of election-related records here that I want to talk about are county election records. Now, these can be difficult to find because in most counties they probably have not survived. But I would recommend that you check TSLA's county microfilm inventories, and they look something like this. This happens to be Lincoln County, and I would suggest if you're looking for election-related records that you look in the county microfilm inventory for their loose records project. That's where the election records are going to be in the county if they have survived and if they've been microfilmed. It is rare, but there are a few counties where there are also printed inventories of these loose records. If you know where this spot is in the microfilm room, near the break room, there's a bookshelf just off the picture to the right of this, a brown wooden bookshelf, and there are actually bound inventories of loose records for 6 counties: Blount, Bradley, Franklin, Giles, Lawrence, and Sumner. So in addition to looking for the microfilm finding aid for your county of interest, if those 6 counties are yours, there's also a bound inventory. So that's the kind of place where you might find election records for your county of interest, or in these loose records. I happened to pick up a while ago the Lawrence County inventory, and on the first page, one of the loose records they had inventoried said voters list on it. Okay? So if you're lucky and these are one of your 6 counties of interest, Blount, Bradley, Franklin, Giles, Lawrence, and Sumner, take a look at those bound inventories of loose records as well. But if you don't find in the microfilm listing here any indication that there are election records for your county of interest, please do check at the county level for those records. You may have to check at the courthouse, at the archives, library, historical society. You might have better luck just asking about loose records rather than election records, because the people who've processed the loose records may not have necessarily known that election records were included in that. Some counties still have these loose records and they don't know it. They're still up in the attic of the courthouse. Maybe other counties have them, but they just haven't processed them yet. Some counties do have them. They know they have them. They've processed them. They've been microfilmed. But ask at the county level as part of searching for county election records. I want to show you an example from my Stewart County of what I found when I was processing the county election records. And these have not been microfilmed. They have been digitized, and if you email the archives, they will email you a copy of the digitized records. Found tickets from 1855 governor's race for the Democratic Party and the American Party, telling us who to vote for. In Stewart County, we have the loose election records with the actual names of individuals who showed up to vote for about 40 years, from 1840 to 1880, which is a great thing to have. Okay, So I want to show you this one in particular. And the list on the right will look similar to what we saw in Record Group 87. It's a list of individual people who showed up to vote for a specific election. This is February 9, 1861. This was the vote in which Tennessee decided whether or not to have a secession convention. And statewide, this vote failed. Tennessee at this time chose not to have a secession convention. This is the return for Stewart County District 7, which is where Dover, the county seat, is. There were 213 votes cast. I show the last of that list of 213 names. These were the people who turned out for that vote. It tells you about how many people were living in that district in 1861. At the end of the loose record is the tallies to show who won that election. In this case, you see Brandon, Roberts, and Johnson all listed as candidates to the convention if it were going to be held. And then you see convention and no convention. 210 people voted for a convention. 3 people in this district voted for no convention. So this particular county, the secession vote was heavily in favor. Statewide, it was not. And as you know, Tennessee voted at this time not to have a secession convention. Here in Record Group 87 is the certification for that election. So that certification was sent here to the Secretary of State, and it is part of Record Group 87 that we talked about earlier. Here's the county sheriff saying, "I do certify," and he's certifying the results of that county-wide vote. So even if you don't have county records for your county, in Record Group 87, for this time period, if it's of interest to you, you should be able to see how your county voted. Countywide in this particular election, February of 61, there were about 1,000 votes cast. But historians in the crowd will know that after this vote, when Fort Sumter was fired upon, when Lincoln called on Southern troops to put down a Southern rebellion, Tennessee said, "Wait a minute, we want to vote again." So there was a second vote in June of 61. I show you the results that we found at the county archives for the same district. Only a few months later, 939 names were listed. How many people lived in that district? About 200. But somebody, by candlelight overnight, came up with 939 names to put on this election return. Same district. For representation, unanimous. Everybody voted for representation, everybody voted for separation. The total down at the bottom for no separation and no separation says alt. So there were some shenanigans going on in this district. About 700 names were fabricated by somebody. So as part of processing this, I had to sort this out. I just had to know. And so I highlight here some of the names of real people that actually did live in the county, and everybody else was just made up. Mostly it was first initial and last name, and knowing the county, those are names that just don't even exist in the county. So some shenanigans were going on. But what happened in Record Group 87? What did the sheriff do to certify that election? He certified those results. He sent this in, and it's in Record Group 87, saying we had 1,900 votes cast in the county this time. So if you're researching this time period, maybe go to your county and see if your county had shenanigans as well. I'll remind you in closing that Secretary of State is in charge of elections, and if you go to the elections link on the TSLA homepage, there's an easy place to register to vote online. I would encourage you to vote, to register to vote if you're not, so that you can become part of these record collections here at TSLA. And I thank you for your time this morning.